Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the results of the earnings call in the third quarter. We will have simultaneous translation for those who would like to watch the presentation in English, and I will be sharing the presentation now. So the results of the third quarter of 2021, we'll go into numbers directly. And in the third quarter, we had 96 million in investments in the Gaia platform. So they have already taken on a bit more of a pace in investment with Gaia 1, which is the project with the greatest value. We reached the last 12 months. We reached this investment. So this considered to be very good results. When you consider our peers, most of them are below what we had in the past month. Our net operational revenue was 432 million, 65.5% compared to the third quarter of 2020. So the net debt to EBITDA was 0.65 times due to the evolution of the EBITDA and LTM, and below what we did in the previous quarter. The average cost of the debt was 8.24 per year, and this was already impacted by the increase of the Selic rate. And we had an adjusted EBITDA of 140,316,000, 152.2% compared to the third quarter of 2020. And we had a net income of 97,595,000, 281.9% compared to the third quarter of 2020. And we had a non-recurring event, which was the recognition of 25 million in fiscal credits that took place in this quarter. When we are talking about the revenue, we ended with 432. This is 7.3% more. We still had some price adjustments occurring, especially in the beginning of the third quarter, and 65.5% above what we did in the third quarter of 2020. The exports represented 15%, a little below what they had presented in the second quarter and also in the third quarter of 2020. Our EBITDA ended in 140,316,000. This number is 17.8% above what we did in the second quarter and 152% above what we had in the third quarter of 2020 with a margin of 32.4%. The net income was 97 million, 281.9% above the third quarter of 2020 and 44.2% compared to the second quarter. When we get into the businesses for corrugated cardboard, the market had a setback of 2.5% compared to the third quarter of 2020, and it grew 2.3% compared to the second quarter. On square meters, the market had a setback of 3.2% compared to the third quarter of 2020 and 2.9% growth in regards to the second quarter of 2021. So we did have the third quarter of 2020 that was a real strong demand with many factors due to greater consumption from e-commerce and major demand in the food sector at this moment in the third quarter of 2020. And here you have an adjustment into a high level of the demand way above what we had in 2019 and in the previous years, and with levels of evolution in regards to the previous expenses due to e-commerce and the sustainability of the packages compared to other materials. At Irani, we had a setback that was a little bigger than the market, which was minus 7.7% compared to the third quarter of 2020 and 1.7 compared to the second quarter of 2021. This retraction or setback is due to the fact that we stopped doing extra hours that we had in the third quarter of 2020, and typically we don't have extra hours, but at that time we did because there was a big demand and need from our customers. But we did do this at some weekends, but this didn't happen this year. Besides this, we also had a bit of a loss in the portfolio from the unit in Santa Catarina, uh, removing a bit of the customers with low profitability, and this is substituted by others as well. But this happens in a longer period. So this is why we have this drop compared to the second quarter. But now we have the capacity of the factories totally occupied, and the volume will generate until you have the expansions of Catarina that should be happening in the first semester of last year, of next year, sorry. We will continue to have quarterly volumes close to 40,000 tons. So 7.7 below, and for the same reasons explained, and 1.7 compared to the same period in 2021. And when it comes to prices for corrugated cardboard, we had an increase in prices compared to the third quarter of 78.8% and an increase in prices compared to the second quarter of 7.8%, caused by an increase that was still taking place in the beginning of the third quarter, and also due to this loss in the portfolio of Santa Catarina, which also contributes to the average price increases. So when it comes to square meters, we had an evolution of 79.1% and 8.2 in regards to the second quarter. When I got into the prices of paper for packaging, we had an increase of 0.1%, practically the same volume, and 4.3% above what we had in the second quarter of 2021. So we sold to the market 26,135, which would be volumes that are very significant for paper for flexible packaging, which have expert margins, and 5,831 that we transferred sales of rigid packaging because we had more flexible packages. And the volume of the corrugated cardboard um, remains the same for transfers. So when it comes to prices, we had 36.6% of increase and an evolution of 4.6% in the quarter. So our margins of these papers that are fiber-based evolved a lot, and they remain in this way for the next quarters until we can have a new price adjustment over 2022. So the average pricing for the rigid packaging evolved 122.2% compared to the third quarter and 5.5% compared to the second quarter of 2021, reaching 5,338. Now, when we assess the prices of the scraps, we had an evolution in the annual scraps of 76% and a drop that was very significant in the value of these scraps of 27.7% in the market as a whole. At Irani, we had an evolution of 90.8 and 22.4% less. And this difference in the drop compared to the market is due to this mix of scraps regionally. The scraps in the south have value that's a little higher because the south does not produce scraps that are sufficient for all of the operations in the south. So many of the scraps are imported from the southeast with values that are a little greater than another region. So the drop in the south has been more disclosed than in the southeast. Well, that's why you have this difference, but we should be converging into the average price in the country in the fourth quarter. When we look at the stiff price in regions, we had 84.1% evolution and a drop of 18.3% compared to the second quarter. As I mentioned, a smaller drop than in the southeast. In Minas Gerais, we had 77% evolution and a drop of 28.2% due to the fact that it's located in the southeast, where there was a more significant drop in the scrap prices. And in Irani, we had 82.9% growth compared to the third quarter and a drop of 21%, as I had mentioned, in regards to the second quarter. In the resins business, we had a good volume evolution compared to last year, 27.4%, and 5.9% compared to the second quarter, with a very strong demand in resins. Basically, all of the volume is from exports. The average price of the rosin went up 109.6% compared to the third quarter. Here, this is due to the increase in the prices in dollars and also the actual currency, and 9.4% compared to the third quarter of 2021, 9,059. So the turpentine prices went 124.8% and a drop of 1.2% in the price compared to the third quarter. Here you can see an increase of the shipping costs that led to this drop. In paper for exports, we transfer all of the increase in the freight costs due to the international freight situation. But in turpentine, we were not able to transfer this increase from the second quarter to the third quarter, but the prices were maintained at a very high level, and they were also benefited by the dollar being at a higher level. Now, when we look at the debt situation, we ended with 0.65, a drop of 0.12% in the net debt to EBITDA ratio, with a total debt of 635.7 million and a net debt of 272 and a cash position of 363.2% in the closing of the semester. Most of this debt is in current national currency and foreign currency. We only have short-term debt operations with currency advancement contracts, and in the long term, 88% and 12% short term. So the debt profile is very satisfactory. And from the fourth quarter, we're going to start having resources from the operation that we structured with the BNDES to fund the Gaia platform. As I mentioned, the ROIC in the past 12 months had an increase that was very significant due to the increase in the EBITDA and profitability of the company in the quarter, 22.2%, 4.4 percentage points, and 6.7 percentage points compared to the third quarter of 2020, with a very consistent evolution when compared to the previous quarters. And as I mentioned, way above our competitors, whether they are international or Brazilian. So the average cost of the debt in the past month was 5.4%. This is still considering a drop in the average cost, but as we saw, due to the increase in the Selic costs, we're already noticing bigger costs. When we get into the Gaia platform specifically, we have some Gaia 1, Gaia 2, and Gaia 3 projects that are already under execution, and Gaia 4 and 5 are still in licensing processes. So the gross investment, what we're calling the first cycle, the first projects approved by the board of 883,519 gross investments, and the net investments that are already recovering the taxes, 776. So we've already delivered 93,325 in this quarter, and from the 883, which would be the gross investment. So from this, we were able to have a bit about 20% of the value. So when it comes to the schedule, with the physical delivery, we already have 5% of Gaia 1, and now it's gaining speed as we have the equipment arriving, and we should have a significant advance in the physical delivery of Gaia 1. And so we have 63% of the product already delivered. We should start commissioning this equipment. So, and also the new printer from April next year onwards, which is totally in line with our planning. So as we have the renovation of the machine 2, we already have the development of the equipment for our suppliers with 21% execution. Gaia 4 and Gaia 5, we've already completed the engineering phase, and we're at the final phase now for licensing with IMA, which has taken a little longer than what we imagined initially due to the licensing and the process that needs to take place before the specific licensing of our PCHs. So the second cycle is set up by the 6, 7, 8, and 9 process, and 90 to 237 in gross investments. So Gaia 6 is a project with automation for our operations in Santa Catarina. We have been acquiring a equipment to add all of the data, and we're also expanding our wastewater treatment station, which is what we're calling phase 1 in the paper unit in Santa Catarina with investments of 22,800,000. And Gaia 8 is a new printer from the Indaiatuba packaging process, and automation also the intermediate inventory in the São Paulo Indaiatuba process in 42 million. The unit of Indaiatuba is the most modern with the biggest production volume for packaging. The unit in Santa Catarina will have a production volume very similar when we complete Gaia 2, and we are expanding the automation in Indaiatuba with the automation of the intermediate inventory, which is a final phase for automation in the unit. So the second cycle of investments was approved at the end of the third quarter, and now we are at the phase where we will be hiring the equipment and should be completing Gaia 6 in the second semester of next year. Gaia 7, with the expansion of the wastewater treatment center in the second semester. The next printer is also in the acquisition phase. We should have it deployed by the second semester of next year, and inventory automation as well, where we're completing the acquisition of this equipment, and there is a term for delivery up until the first semester of 2024. So these are imported equipment that were made customized for our unit. So we had in this quarter also our first investor day was performed online, and the recording is available on the IR website. It was a really good event. We had good repercussion among investors, and we should be repeating this investor day every year. And we will also be working on an ESG day in the first semester next year. So this quarter, we also had recognition by ANEFAC, certifying Irani as the winner of the 25th Transparency Award among the most transparent companies in the country because of the quality of its financial balance sheets. We're among the 15 selected best companies reaching 8 billion in annual revenue. So this is an award that we are really happy to have reached, because it's not an award where you have the inscription. It's just selected by FITECAFE with students from PhD courses and master courses at USP University that select 4,000 publications that are made annually by companies that are publicly held or privately held. And in a meeting with the board, we had the approval of the second cycle with the repurchasing of stock that was already taking place, and also the approval of the second cycle of investments in the Gaia platform that I had presented before. Here you can see our IR team, Mojivan, our finances management director that's been leading all of our financial area and investor relations area. And he has ongoing contact with the market. Evandro, our accounting manager and investor relations leader as well. Alex, the accounting coordinator for investor relations. Mariciani, our investor relations manager. and Emmanuel and Vincenzo as well, our analysts for investor relations, helping to work with our shareholders. When it comes to results, this is what we had to share today. We are very happy with the results we reached in this quarter, and the prognosis is still very favorable, um, reaching a whole new level of profitability for the company from now on. We're very optimistic and for the fourth quarter due to the results we've been having, and also the beginning of next year with a new level of demand for corrugated cardboard in regards to 2019. So this is a level that really adds this growth of e-commerce and also the substitution of packaging for paper packaging, which are a lot more sustainable from an environmental perspective and recognized by the population as well. So thank you very much. And now we are opening to questions, any possible questions. And Ojivan will present these questions and coordinate this.
Excelente. Bom dia a todos. É um
Well,
prazer estar de novo aqui
good
com
morning,
vocês.
everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here talking about the company's
Bom,
results.
a primeira que chegou
But
aqui
one of the first ones that
um
came
nome, pessoal,
was
sem nome para nós, mas ela diz o seguinte:
no name, but it seems to be
você
anonymous.
considera
But it says,
sensacional
do you
participar
consider any operational changes to reduce corporate expenses with the group's participation? Well, actually, we already have administrative expenses and SG&A that's very lean. We've adjusted our structure many times, and we have a very lean structure. So actually, the administrative expenses represent a little more than 4% of our net revenue, and this percentage is way below the average in the sector, especially for the big companies. And so we're expecting to be working in a very lean way. We have some structures that represent future investments, also with innovation and new business opportunities. But from the operational perspective of the business, as is, we have structures that are very lean. And we actually just worked on a recent project with Falcone to be able to work on these adjustments and rationalization of our process. But of course, we always have a strong understanding and perspective on the structures due to the automation of the processes and digitalization in the overall company. But at the moment, I'd say that the structures are very well adjusted to our needs.
comentando, né, Sérgio, sobre
And maybe to add on here, also about the provision
todo
of
o déficit
participation in the results and
referente
profits.
a 10% do
This is about
percentual do
10% of the net income,
receita de caixa,
and it does not have this cash effect at the moment.
de remuneração
This considers variable compensation programs in the long term,
administração de
as approved
então
by the board of the
cerca
company.
de 10%
So it always represents 10% net income,
ela é feita
and
através
it's made as a way to establish a provision that can absorb any long-term compensation problems that are approved by the board. And it is limited to
anual.
annual compensation approved by the General Assembly.
Bom, tem outra pergunta aqui
Well, we have another
do
question here
Miguel Yambá.
from Angelo
Boa
Miguel.
tarde. As margens
Good
mostraram
afternoon. The margins had a significant improvement in the third quarter.
estabilidade dessas
What is your
margens
vision for sustainability
dois.
in these margins for 2021 and 2022? Well, the main phenomenon for an increase in margins at this moment is the drop in scraps and the increase in the prices that continue in the third quarter. So prices for uh, virgin fiber paper should not be modified. The prices in corrugated cardboard are also maintained as stable, and we imagine that there will not be more pressure for price adjustments. But next year, the price maintenance will really depend on the demand we'll have in the beginning of the second quarter next year. So, by what we can see so far, the demand is very strong. E-commerce continues to advance. So we have a very positive prognosis in the overall sector for the next year, especially. So now, Thali is asking about what's the
Inglês,
price
inglês
expectation for the
é
next years
realidade
when it comes
e
to
essa
paper and boxes.
oportunidade
Do you
para nós
consider negative
trabalharmos
impact for the ramping of the Defline
no setor
um, machine when you
dessa
consider the
forma
scenario locally
para
for the
conseguir
supply and demand?
Eh, Na
Well,
verdade, os preços eles devem ter
actually,
um comportamento
prices
de
should
estabilidade.
have some
Nós
kind of a
devemos ter
stability
uma
behavior. We
queda
should
de
have
preço nos
maybe
papéis
some level of drop
agrícolas, principalmente
in the papers that are
milho e
scrap
milhão, já
based.
houve uma queda pequena
And there
nos
was
papéis
already
e nós devemos ter
a
uma
small drop,
ainda
but we
uma
should
essa
still
possível
have
queda nos papéis.
a bit of a drop due to the drop in
A
the
maior
scrap
oferta de
prices
papel no mercado
and
interno.
also a greater
Isso de um
supply
ponto de
in
vista da
paper in the
produtividade
market
papel, nós
internally.
não vemos qualquer pressão de
And
redução de
from
preço.
the other
Só
papers,
nos
we don't see
negócios
any kind of difference.
que passa
Some
pelos
market that
nossos
really
clientes
absorbs
finais
prices and
de uma
transfers these to
forma
final customers in a way
consistente,
that
não
is
houver
very
redução de preço,
consistent,
nós vamos manter somente
and
os preços
we will
dos
maintain
papéis.
these
No
prices
caso de
for fiber
resina,
paper.
é uma
So
commodity
when it comes to
internacional, os
resins,
nossos
it's an international
variações de
commodity,
preços
and
vão
we're
ser
subject
agora.
to price variations in
Esse ano
dollars.
devem permanecer
This
estáveis
year
e
should
vamos
continue
ter
to
que
be stable,
avaliar aí um pouco
and
mais
we'll have
em
to
função da
assess
demanda que
next
devemos
year
ter na,
due to the
para esses
demand from
materiais.
China
Então a gente
for these
vê
products.
preços
So
pressionados por conta
we
da
see
queda dos
prices being a
trabalhos,
little
mas
pressured due
como a
to the
demanda é
drop in
tão
scrap
boa,
prices,
a gente
but
não
since the
viu
demand is
preços,
very
pelo
good,
menos até o final
we
desse
haven't
ano,
noticed a drop in prices,
relacionados
at
a
least until
preços
the
de
end of this
papéis.
year.
Nós devemos ter
When it comes to
redução de
papers, we
preço
should have an evolution in
de
the
preço,
pricing in
mais no
2022,
final, mais no segundo
but
semestre do ano que vem,
in the second
na
semester of
redução
next
de
year, we
preços
are
nessa
imagining some kind of a
variação
price
de
increase
preço. Mas
due
no
to the inflation in that
caso
period, but a whole new
desse
level of
formato de
margins
acabamento,
especially.
ela
So the
ajuda
cabin
na
machine
manutenção
issue
de
helps with the
dos
maintenance
trabalhos, né, na
of
medida
the
em que você
scrap
tem uma
prices,
inserção
and
de mais fibra virgem no
you
sistema,
have
você tem
more
mais
virgin
demanda
fiber in
por
the
esses
system, so you have
papéis
more
e deixa o
of
mercado de
this paper in the
acabamentos
system available, and
levemente
this makes the
pressionado
scrap market a little
por uma
less
certa
pressured
tendência de
with
queda
a
no
trend
preço.
to some kind of a
Então,
drop in the midterm.
se
So
os preços se manterem em mais
if the
elevado,
prices are
as
kept
margens devem
at high
permanecer
levels, margins should remain
bastante boas aí nos próximos
um,
trimestres.
very well in the next quarters. So Rafael was also asking about pricing. I think this was already answered, but he said, thank you for the results. Are you being able to keep the high prices that are practiced in the last quarter? Well,
A gente não pode falar sobre o quarto
here we
trimestre,
can't talk about the
mas
fourth quarter,
eu posso dizer
but what I
que
can
devem
say is that there was not a
permanecer a tendência
drop in
até o
prices,
final do ano aumento.
and the trend until the end of the year is pretty much the same.
Leonardo Ubara,
Leonardo Bada
olá, dado que já temos
said,
63%
well, considering that we already have
de evolução de
63%
corretores,
evolution
quando
of Gaia
considera que
2,
devemos
when should we
evoluir
start having an
no
increase
volume
in productivity in the volume
Então,
of corrugated
estamos
cardboard?
recebendo
Well,
onduladeira
we
de
are
transportes
receiving the machine,
dessa
which is
expansão.
the biggest investment in this expansion
A
for
onduladeira já
Gaia
está
2.
chegando no Brasil, nós devemos
This
ter
equipment is
ela
already
pronta
arriving in
até o
Brazil.
final
We
do
should
ano.
have it assembled by
Isso
the end of the
com uma
year.
elevação do volume de
And
produção em
with this,
Santa
we'll have an
Catarina,
increase
consequentemente,
in the
algo que
volume
no
of
início do
production
segundo
in Santa
semestre você
Catarina.
vai
And then from the
perceber
beginning of the second
uma
semester,
evolução de
we'll start
participação nossa
noticing some evolution in our
nesse
share, but
processo
growth
de
ramp,
aprendizado da
mainly
máquina.
due
E
to
esse é
the
uma
learning curve
novidade
of
que
this
vai
machine.
acontecer a
And from
cada
April
dia.
onwards, we'll have an evolution also in
Nós vamos
boxes.
ter a
Because
onduladeira
what's
funcionando
happening is
desde
that we'll have
maio
the
e a
corrugator working
conversão
before
chegando só no mês de
and the
abril.
conversion machine only
Nós vamos
arriving in the
ter
month of
alguns
April. So we're going
resultados
to have
de início do ano que
from the
realmente
beginning of the
vão
year
nos
an
deixar
increase in the sales
com um
volume
forte vínculo, inclusive com a aquisição, se eu não me
um,
engano, que veio da unidade da Vila Maria,
due to the machine we brought from the
mas
unit in Villa
uma
Maria.
evolução maior
But
no
this
caixa só vai ver
bigger
sendo
evolution in the boxes we'll only notice in mid
o
next
repasse
year.
de
So we
gás e
start the
energia.
ramp up of the corrugator,
E uma maior
and
venda de
then there's
caixas
a
vai
bigger
começar no
sale of
início do segundo
boxes
semestre do ano que vem,
that's
que é
taking
um
place in the beginning of the
semestre de alta
second semester
sazonalidade
next year, which is the semester with
e
high
nós pretendemos
seasonality,
de
where
colocar os
we
produtos funcionando o
plan
mais rápido
to
possível.
place an additional volume as quick as possible in the market.
O Flávio Bica pergunta,
Flavio is
parabéns
asking
pelos
about
resultados,
what is that?
poderia
Congratulations on the
dividir,
result.
sem o rigor
Could you
matemático
maybe
dessa fase agora, quais os principais setores
share
econômicos
the
que
main
produzem
economic sectors
plastic?
that use the
Se possível, cenários
aniline
principais e
products?
quais
You
os
could maybe highlight the main ones
menos importantes.
and
Obrigado.
what's most important, what's maybe a little less
Na,
important. Well,
no negócio embalagem,
in the
o setor
packaging business,
alimentício
the
como um todo
food
é o
sector
nosso maior setor,
overall is our biggest
quase
segment,
70%, esse não é levantado pelos
representing
nossos
almost
clientes,
70%. of our sales.
Desses 70%, grande
And
parte
from
dos
these
serviços de
70%,
varejistas
a big amount of these are sold to butcheries. And
estavam
so our plant in Santa Catarina is in the middle of a cluster of animal protein companies like JBS, Seara, Aurora, Frimeza, BRF,
BRF como um todo, né, JBS, como
uh,
falei, todas estão ali na
and
região,
all of them are in that region,
produzindo
and they
carne
produce
suína de
um,
aves, né, e nós somos um grande fornecedor de
animal
carne de
protein, and we're a
aves.
big supplier in that
Nossa
region.
participação
So that's
superior
why we have a higher share in the food
no mercado
sector
brasileiro,
than as the overall
temos
market.
70% de participação
And we have 70% share in the food sector due to this issue of the animal protein companies. And we have a smaller share in other segments like plastics
No negócio em
um,
papel, o nosso
and
posicionamento
hygiene and
sempre
cleaning
foi que
products,
nós
etc.
vendemos,
So in the paper
vendemos
business,
agregados de valor,
our understanding
nós
is
não
that
convertemos papel
we do not convert
de embalagem flexível. Nós
paper from
vendemos para
flexible
convertedores
packaging. We
independentes.
sell
Nós temos uma
this to
carteira de
independent
clientes
converters. We have a portfolio of customers with us
de mais de 40
for many,
anos
many
e
years, for over 40 years in Irani,
são os convertedores que
and
convertem
they
sacos de
convert
tecido, que
the
converte
bread
sacolas, que
bags,
converte sacos
bags,
miscelâneos para semente,
miscellaneous bags for seed, coal,
e com
and other
isso a gente
purposes.
tem
And with
uma
this,
venda bastante
we have
consolidada para esses segmentos
a
de
very
conversão tanto
consolidated
de sacos como
volume of
de
sales for
papel,
bags and paper bags. And the resin business is all based on exports. These are products that are geared towards adhesives and paint, as well as perfumes and cleaning materials.
não sei se respondi, mas
I hope that was clear.
Eu acho que o ponto importante aqui é que
I think
o
the most
segmento que
important
demanda
point is that the
produtos da
segment that
Irani
demands most
controlava 57%
products from Irani,
e desses
with
57%
57% of our
era
revenue, and 70% comes from the food sector,
que é
food and
tipicamente
beverages,
resiliente
which is typically very resilient.
de
So even in years
crise
where you have a setback in the
o alimento
GDP or more
sempre é
difficult situations economically, food and beverage always have consistent
segurado por muito
demands,
tempo
and this is what has been
esses resultados da Irani
keeping up with the periods that are more difficult with results at Irani,
esse
giving us significant resilience.
uma das
So
fortalezas
this is something we always mention as strong points, really being
segmentos que
established
nós atendemos
in the segments we work in, which
demandados
are
em períodos
really have high demands even in more complex periods. So the prognosis for the animal protein companies is very significant on mid to long term. So we're a big supplier for these companies, and that's why the evolution of these volumes additionally will be relatively quick because it's a sector that really requires a lot of corrugated cardboard. The next question is also from
existe previsão de conclusão da alienação
how there's still is there still a forecast for the conclusion of the process in Villamari? This question I can answer. Our forecast is that we'll complete this transaction by this year in December.
detalhes muito em função da liberação
We're depending on a few details,
para o
really due to the approval of the delivery, but this was a little delayed, however,
final desse ano
but our
ainda.
expectation is that by the end of this year we'll be completing.
A outra pergunta aqui que eu também
And
Daniel Halben,
another question from Danielle Alvin.
boa tarde.
How's it going, Danielle? Good afternoon. And with the drop of scraps to about 1,000 reais and a currency at 560, how do you imagine the situation with imports? Well,
A base importada hoje, a maioria
for imported scraps, it would reach 1,150, and SIF scraps in the local market would be 1,245. So this amount was, as you can see, when scraps went up, about 1,100 reais, and now this amount was a little more distant due to a drop in the local market. So it's more worth it to consume scraps in the local market. Yeah, so actually it went back to its collection process that we had before the pandemic. So as work on site and in the physical offices started going back to normal and people went back to consuming, we started having the collection of scraps totally normalized, and that's why we have a super supply. And then the clubbing machine will be another volume of paper that's very important, and it will add virgin fiber into the system, which is going to pressure scraps a little more downward. So in the short to mid-term scenario, we see scraps having a stability trend and some kind of a drop considering this additional volume. So virgin fibers. So what was declared by the competitors that most of this paper is for export, but there's also part of the paper being used in the internal market, most likely to substitute some less
O
skillful
Rafael
paper.
Juliette também pergunta,
Well,
existe
Rafael is also asking about if
algum
there's any
valor de
news
crédito de
in
carbono?
regards to the discussions on carbon credits.
Quer falar aí, Júlio?
Quer que eu fale? Tá. Pois é, na
Well,
verdade, a gente
actually,
segue vendendo crédito de carbono, nós temos um
we
projeto
continue
de
to
projeto
sell
de
carbon credits.
contrato
We have two
conosco, regulado
projects
desde 2006,
listed in the regulated market ever since
é,
2006.
a
And
tendência, esse crédito é
the
muito
trend
rápido, né? Já os últimos financiamentos
is,
foram
well,
quase 4
these
euros,
cards were really
mas o
cheap.
que estão falando, o que
But
se estima para
what they're saying now is
2025,
that if
26,
what they're
27,
estimating
parece
now
que
with
o mundo de fato
26 and the world seems to really
virou para
have waken
a
up
transição
when
energética
it
e
comes
essa
to the
questão
energy
econômica,
transition
e
and
a gente está vendo
carbon.
acontecendo
We've been monitoring what's going on
aproximação,
also in
tem gente falando que o crédito
COP26,
de carbono vai a 100
and people
dólares
are
em
saying that
2026,
carbon credits are going to go up to like 100
então é
euros.
uma diferença muito grande.
So it's a huge
Esses projetos que a
difference.
gente tem podem se
And this
beneficiar
project
disso,
we have could be
pode ser
benefited
superando.
by this increase in
Está sempre
prices.
muito em voga
Another
é
topic that we're always talking about a lot is forestry carbon credit.
ainda não chegou
And
na
this
Assembleia,
still does not have
seria
a
está em
standardized
negociação no
accepted methodology.
na
It's under
COP26,
negotiation
sendo
at
artigo
COP26 with the
6 do
regulation of
2,
this
que estabelece ao Brasil
former
como dono
agreement
da
of
geração
the
originária,
Paris Agreement. So
e
this
também
favors
ainda não houve
Brazil with, and all the forestry
definição.
companies,
Eu acho que essa é uma
and there's still
tendência
no
ainda
definition. So I
para
think this is
frente,
a
muito
trend
positiva, é uma
that's
externalidade,
very positive, an externality that
mas
we
não
have in
é
the
certo
company.
para afirmar
But now it's still too early to state
em montantes,
uh,
dimensão de quanto que seria o benefício definitivo.
and establish any
Nesse
kind of
caso, é importante
dimensions in regards
ter
to
os
the benefits for the
princípios do
company.
negócio
So I think it's important to keep
definidos,
aware that the
estar
company's
seguindo nessa
business is
tendência
really
secular de
in
ESG,
this circular
por
economy
conta
ESG
da
thesis
matéria-prima renovável,
due
por
to the
conta da
renewable raw
reciclagem,
materials and the
temos
circular economy, and
redução
two-thirds of our raw
da
materials
reciclagem,
being scraps and
a nossa
recycling,
energia ela é
and our
renovável,
energy is
Gaia 1 vai se
renewable.
tornar
Gaia
autossuficiente
1 is
em
going to make
energias
it
renováveis.
self-sufficient
Você
in
que
renewable energy.
você
So
olha, né, as embalagens
anywhere you
agora
look,
que
the
são
packages
também
are
demandadas pelo seu apelo
being demanded more
ambiental, né, de
because of
circularidade.
their environmental
Então
appeal.
tem, por qualquer ângulo que você olha, o business ele é muito,
So anywhere you look, the business is
focado nessa
very
tendência secular
focused in this circular economy
de ESG.
trend and
Tem muita coisa
ESG.
boa aí para
So I
2025.
think there's a lot of good stuff happen up ahead.
Mas indo adiante aqui, a Marcela acredita pergunta,
And
as importações da China
Marcel was also asking about
pode afetar essa demanda do frigorífico?
imports to China, if they could affect this demand from the animal protein companies. Henrique?
Na verdade, acho que
Well,
o âmbito da
actually,
pergunta dele é perguntando
his question is more
em
related
relação
to
à medida do governo que
what
fez
would be
contra a
the
carne
Chinese government
importada
measure
brasileira,
against
né?
the Brazilian
E não,
beef
eu acho que é uma coisa
and meat.
pontual que vai
But I
voltar para o
think this is
mercado
something that's just occasional
gradativamente. Não acho que vai
and
ser
it'll
algo
gradually come back to the market. I don't believe this is going to be impacted. So about this issue with China, and the block is more related to beef, and most of our concentration is in poultry and chicken and pork. So for price reductions, it is a lot more concentrated in the beef segment.
Muito bem.
Well, very good.
Brenner, tudo bem, Caio?
Hi, Caio.
Boa tarde,
He's
senhores.
also
Queria
asking about,
perguntar
well,
sobre
good
custo de
afternoon. Can you talk about cost inflation?
essa parte,
Um,
dar vários que quiser
about
detalhar.
scraps.
Espero aumento relevante
And
nos próximos trimestres.
we do you expect a relevant increase in the space in the next quarters?
De fato, a gente está com uma pressão de custos
Well,
muito
we have
grande,
cost pressure that's very
acordos
significant.
sendo fechados,
Agreements being
salários sendo fechados em dois
made
dígitos, né?
at double digits, and
Importação de produtos
there is, of
importados em
course,
função do
pressure
dólar,
also for import products
pressão
due to
para
the
trazer
dollar
todos os
and
produtos e todos os
pressure in
insumos
basically all of our inputs
repassar essa inflação
to transfer
que
this
os gestores
inflation
estão tomando
of the
fora.
past 12 months. So
A
it's
gente
very
deve ter uma
strong.
inflação de
We should
custos
have a cost
parecida com a
inflation
inflação
that's very
oficial,
similar to the official
mais um pouco
inflation
maior
rate, but maybe a little higher
do que a gente está vendo como inflação
than what we
oficial.
are
Então,
considering
a
as the
gente
official
imagina
inflation.
que essa pressão
So
nos
we
próximos
imagine that this
trimestres
issue for the next quarters
diminua,
should
porque enquanto a
reduce a bit
inflação for controlada,
as the inflation becomes more
a gente vai ter
controlled
uma queda
and there is some kind of a drop
das empresas.
in this
Mas esse, de
situation.
fato, é um tema
But this
bastante
is certainly a very important topic
e
for
a
us,
manutenção dos
and
preços
that's why it's so
é
important to keep prices at high
mesmo com a queda das
levels,
avaras, porque a gente
even with
tem
the
que
drop
manter
in the
algumas
scraps, because we
insumos
do
de
have
toda a ordem
adjustments in
sendo
costs and inputs being
para nós.
transferred to us at all
Quer
times.
complementar, Edmilson, essa
Would you
questão?
like to add on,
Não, eu acho que esse é
Ojivam?
um headwind que todas
No,
as
I think that's
empresas
the
enfrentam
headwind that all the companies are having,
atualmente.
leading with
A gente tem, o
inflation,
setor
and
antecipou por conta de todo
we were actually able
o
to
aumento dos
anticipate
preços.
this.
O desafio agora é
And
não
now the
fazer
biggest
mais essa
challenge is not let the margins be
a gente
uh,
tem
damaged
infelizmente tem
due
fatos
to
que
the
intervêm, né?
future
Revisão de
impact.
salários, né?
So there is
Políticas
salary corrections,
eh,
collective salary
mas de alguma
agreements
forma a gente
with
tem que
employees,
estar
but in some ways,
negociar
we're going
para
to have
manter
to
os
try to
nossos níveis de
mitigate this to be able to
atendimento.
keep the profitability levels we have here in the
Então,
group.
dependendo da demanda do próximo
And
ano,
depending
a
on the
gente está
demands
devendo
next
ainda
year
futuros
that we're
que não
noticing that
sabemos
are
a taxa
still
de
quite
taxa de
strong,
juros
we still
norte-americana.
don't know what the interest rate
Crescimento da
impact
economia
will
continua a
be
ser forte,
in the
mesmo
economy,
com a
right?
inflação,
So this could be
mas nós estamos vendo para o
significant,
setor de uma
but
maneira
for
bastante
this sector,
resiliente,
we
de modo
see very resilient
que
demand
isso
at a whole new
vai
level,
fazer com que
which
os preços se
will
mantenham
make
nesse
prices
patamar e até
keep it
sendo
up at
regulados
this
no
level,
começo do segundo
and maybe
semestre.
even cause some kind of price adjustment in the second semester of next year.
A Marcela,
Exactly.
então,
So Marcella had a question, I think.
olá, gostaria de saber de vocês se
Hello, I'd
vocês
like to
poderiam detalhar um
know
pouco
if you
mais
could
as
provide
expectativas
a little more
positivas
details on
para
your
a
positive
Irani e
expectations
rentabilidade
for
no
the demand and
segundo ano,
profitability in the last quarter
os preços
of
devem
the
se
year.
manter elevados
Should
para
prices
dar
be
uma
kept
relação
high with the
positiva
impact of this increase in the inflation? Could this
Já
impact your
está
operation?
afetando, né?
Well,
São
this is
taxas de
already
juros
affecting this.
importantes,
Interest
mas os
increase is
resultados
significant, but
estão
the
sendo
results
muito
are
bons.
apparently very
Eu não
good,
vejo nenhuma alteração
and I
estrutural
don't see any
nos
structural
resultados
modification in the
para esse
results
ano. Nós imaginamos
for
que
the
isso
fourth
vai
quarter.
continuar
We
dentro
imagine
do
that
previsto.
it'll remain
Nós
with a
estamos
very
vendendo
positive
na
demand, and
nossa
we're also
capacidade.
um,
Não vai haver uma
selling at
alteração grande de
our full
preços nesse ano.
capacity. So
Provavelmente
there will
vai
not
ser
be another
só
increase in prices
manter
this
esse
year. We're just
patamar
going to
que
be
estão.
maintaining prices at the levels they're at.
Mas
But
no próximo ano a gente não está vendo
in the
ainda
next
nada
year, we also haven't
que
seen
justifique uma queda
anything that would justify some kind of a
volumétrica.
drop in the
Mas a
volume.
gente tem que avaliar tudo isso
But we need to
com
assess this
calma.
in the
Mas eu
beginning
não
of next
vejo,
year.
até por conta dessa
But
pressão maior que a gente está tendo em outros
considering this
insumos, uma
greater
queda
inflation and other items, I
muito
don't
grande
imagine
no papelão
a
higiênico.
drop in prices even when you consider corrugated
o
cardboard.
Leonardo, o Bara também perguntou
Now,
se
Leonardo
vocês
also had
já
another
vejam
question about what's the perspective for rigid
agora no
paper
quarto trimestre de junho, quarto
in the
trimestre de
fourth
junho,
quarter,
o custo do seu principal insumo, as aparas especiais.
considering your costs
Isso deve ter
if your
muito
main input
eu acho que
dropped.
esse patamar
Well,
de R$ 1.000 por
I
tonelada
think this
vai
level of
compensar
1,000
de
rands per
primeira
ton
forma.
is compensating the
A
supply
gente
chain,
imagina que
and
vai
we
permanecer
imagine
nesses
that
níveis,
it'll remain pretty much at
acima dos
these
R$ 1.000
levels of
por
900 to
tonelada para
1,000 reais
mantermos
per
um
ton,
patamar
which is a
interessante, porque
level
remunera
that's
bem
quite
essa
interesting
cadeia
because it compensates
e
the
tem uma margem
supply
expressiva
chain, and there's a
para as empresas
significant
na medida que
margin
os
for the
preços manterem.
companies as prices
Essa,
don't
O
drop.
agora no
So,
cerne do miolo aqui, qual a perspectiva para o papel
what is
vegetal?
the perspective for virgin paper?
Esse sim tem
Well,
pressão de queda, porque
there
tem uma
is
relação
a
muito
pressure with
próxima
the
do
drop
papel
because the correlation is very strong. 80,
do miolo
90% of the raw materials
é a base de aparas,
are
100%,
scrap
né?
based, almost 100%, right, in
Isso
Hiki?
tem
And
uma pressão por
this
queda de
um,
preços.
has a
Nós já
pressure with
tivemos
a
uma
drop
queda
in prices. So we already had a drop
mas nós
in the
temos uma
second quarter,
venda de papel
but we have sale of paper that's relatively small, especially in the second quarter due to the pressure for the packaging and the seasonality. So it's going to drop, but we hope that in the final calculation of our process, which is the packaging, there's no significant drop. We have some drops in paper plates, which also are impacted by the scrap prices. But boxes, which is most of our sales, we should not have reductions that are significant in the next month. So just to highlight, the middle of the bread has a very small sale. So all of the middle parts that are produced are consumed in the packaging factories, and whatever's left over is sold. So it does not have a relevant participation in the company's revenue. Yeah, so we had sales of paper for rigid packages of 5,800 tons, so about over 1,000 tons per month. That has been dropping due to the demand in the packaging, and this sale will be ending by the first semester of next year as the packaging embalagem Santa Catarina starts performing also upon the expansion. So we might have a lack of paper even in the system if we do not perform any production investments in recycled fiber, and so that we can really keep this balance between paper and the volume of packaging, which makes us be completely integrated and not rely on the purchase of paper. Well, Victor also has a question here. Congratulations on the results. Two questions. I saw that 9% of the costs are pulp. How, since pulp comes from forests, would there also be a non-cash cost? And what's the profit used for the payment of dividends to calculate the payout of 50%? Will 97 million be used? So the first one here I can answer, Victor. Those 9% would be pulp, but over here you have a fixed cost element, and this is part cash and part non-cash. We can actually open this information to you if you want. So it's not all non-cash. And the second part of the question about dividends is the payout is 50% of the profit. The 97 million in the third quarter, that's the base. But the only thing is you have some adjustments to calculate the dividends. You need to add up some of the reserves and other elements, but this is not very relevant when it comes to adjustments. And this is what's going to be used for the payout. But I want to remind you that in this, we quarterly distribute 25% of this profit. So we're going to be deliberating on this according to the dividend distribution policy approved by the board. And we can approve the distribution of 25% in this third quarter now. And the 25% left will be approved in the General Assembly next year. So this is described in the dividend distribution policy of interest on private capital. So now, is there any expectation for an increase in the rental costs in Lagoon? This is a property that where we had a unit before there, and there was actually this property has been for sale for quite a while. So we are going to be divesting, but it's a region that does not have that much of a demand for this kind of property, so it's being a little difficult to sell, but it's for sale for quite a while, and our idea is that as soon as possible, we can divest from this property or asset. Let's see what else. We have a few more here. Angelo also asked about e-commerce, right? What's the scenario for this sector in 2022? Well, our share in the e-commerce is relatively small still. It's about 3%, but our challenge for 2022 is to reach 6%. So we're going to be doubling our volume for this segment. And the good news is that we are already providing to the four main platforms in Brazil. That's the good news with boxes or corrugated cardboard slates. And so we should be doubling our production in 2022 for the e-commerce segment. So despite the fact that it represents 3% for us, this is an effect in the overall sector. So the size of the sector grows with e-commerce because it's a package that did not exist in traditional retail. So you consume a lot more corrugated cardboard in online retail, and this causes an increase in the market overall. So that's why it changed levels after the pandemic because of this phenomenon and also the issue with sustainability in the substitution of plastic mainly in some applications for paper and cardboard and corrugated cardboard. So the prognosis for next year is that we should have an increase in the speed of growth, but all of the prognoses that we've noticed are for double-digit evolution in the next year. So there's a shift in behaviors with the pandemic that really makes people buy items that are more significant, that have price comparison possibilities occurring online, and they're already used to buying personal consumption items online as well as from other regions in the country and the world. So this becomes a purchase method that is already part of people's day-to-day lives. And our expectation is that it'll continue to grow double digits with a higher speed than what we had as growth in the past 2 years.
Bom, o Marcelo Azem também
Well,
perguntou
Marcelo
como
also
veria
mentioned that
inserir o mercado de crédito
uh, what would be the perspective for the carbon credit market for revenue? What's the perspective for revenue in the next years with the sale of these credits? And well, in regards to the completion of the guide to platform, what's the expectation for productivity in this group? Well, let's start off from the end. The expansion project for the unit in Santa Catarina will lead the cardboard production to grow 23%, especially for the unit in Santa Catarina. The evolution is 56% of the volume in that unit, but the overall company would be 23%. And we should begin this upon maturity of the project after we have all of the additional volume sold. So we have a curve that starts off from January next year, and it will move on until you have the consolidation of the volumes at a whole new level from then on. And the carbon credit issue, we've already been in this market. We've already been commercializing this in the Kyoto Protocol, and we're going to be maybe adapting this to some of the new rules that will be taking place after COP26. So Giovanni, do you want to discuss this issue with the carbon credit market? Well, yeah, we already sell carbon credits ever since 2006. We're the first company in Brazil in this sector, and we've already monetized over 17 million reais selling carbon credits to the world, Shell, Cargill, and so this is a business that's already in our day-to-day operations, our business as usual. But what we still don't have is the forestry carbon credit sale, which is an expectation Brazil has. And the forest companies really intend to monetize the carbon credits for the planted forest and the native forest. And in order to do this, we rely on the regulations of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which is being under discussion right now at COP26. And so the price of carbon credits ever since the Kyoto Protocol finished dropped a lot. So we monetize a lot less actually than what we did in the past. But the perspective of having this price growing in the future is significant, so we can increase the revenue also that already exists in our P&L. So I'm also adding on here the landing page of the Gaia platform. So if you don't know about this yet, there's a lot of data. Uh, for the increase in production, the end of the program, and the complete budget that you can monitor.
Muito bem. E nós temos mais, acho que é a última aqui que eu
Well, we have, I think, the
pessoal me ajuda aqui se eu esqueci alguma,
final
eu acho que
point
é a
here. I'm
última.
sorry if I forgot some
É só lembrar
questions
que
there,
a
but
Ordem dos Administradores
you
ela pede a
mentioned that the
representação até 10%
participation
do
considers up
líder
to
de risco
10% of the net
social.
income and
Esse
the
ano,
limit
lá na
approved by
Ordem dos
SA. For
Resultados,
this year, what is the limit
essa linha de
approved?
embalagem
Well,
Klabin, ela compete
looking at
nas
this
linhas
new
de produtos mais
package
novos da
line,
Irani.
Clubbing is competing in the most novel product
Bom,
line
essa
in
questão do
Irani.
pode falar, Henrique?
And, well,
Linha de embalagem que
uh,
funciona aqui da
for
Klabin.
the,
A
yeah,
Klabin
it talks about
concorre,
the packaging
Klabin,
from
como é
Clubbing.
que ela concorre com
Clubbing
vocês,
actually competes with us,
principalmente na embalagem de papelão de
especially
plástico
for corrugated
e
cardboard packaging.
especificamente em
And
grandes volumes, né? Nós
for
temos
big
hoje uma
accounts, like
carteira bem
we have a
dividida
portfolio that's really diluted
entre
and fragmented
pequenos e
with
médios clientes e
mid-sized
alguns
and
clientes
small-sized
grandes,
customers and a
que no
few
caso dos
big
frigoríficos,
customers, as
nós
I
temos a
mentioned,
política
the
comercial de
animal
não
protein
concentração.
companies. But we have the
No
commercial
máximo
policy of
20%
non-concentration at
numa
most
unidade,
20%
10%
in a unit and 10% in Indonesia as a whole
temos
of the
em
volume we
papelão de plástico,
sell
então a nossa
in
carteira é
corrugated
bastante
cardboard.
dividida.
So
E
our
nas grandes
portfolio is
contas
pretty
a gente
fragmented, and in
participa
the major accounts, the key accounts, we participate, and Club
também.
being
E nas
also
contas
participate.
médias e pequenas,
In
alguns
the
clientes
mid
que
and
são
small-sized companies,
concorrentes
some
diretos.
customers
No negócio de
are
papel,
competed with by clubbing.
nós
In the
somos
paper
uma
business,
empresa que atua em nichos,
we are a
né? E
company
nos
that operates
nichos,
in
quase
niches.
todos eles, sacolas,
So,
papel para panificação,
in all of the
cerâmica,
niches, like
nós
packaging,
somos líderes no
baking
fornecimento desses
paper, and
materiais.
we are leaders in the
Nós
supply of this
competimos
paper
com a
for these
Klabin
niches.
em
So we
determinados
compete with
momentos
clubbing
com
in
papel
specific moments
de
with
pano, de papel
the paper that we call
para sacos, né?
paper
Sacos
for
mais pesados.
bags, heavier
Mas
bags.
tipicamente a Klabin
But
converte
typically, clubbing
esses sacos de
converts
cimento na sua própria operação
these
e vende o
into
volume
cement
perdeu.
bags in its own
Portanto,
operation. It
quando
sells
o
a
segmento
small
cimento
volume
está
in
em
the market.
crescimento,
So
está muito
when the cement segment
aquecido no
is
Brasil
really
afora, a
heated,
venda de
which is
papel
the
Klabin
case
para o
now,
mercado ela acaba não sendo tão
the
significativa.
sale of paper from clubbing to the
A
market is not
nova
that
linha de
significant.
embalagem, eu imagino que seja
Well, the new
o papel
package line
kraftliner novo, né? Não é embalagem,
is probably the new craftliner
imagino que seja.
package,
Se
right?
tiver alguma
I think that's
informação
part of
também,
the
nos avisa,
question. If that's
Marcos,
not it, please let us know, Marco.
Mas a
para
questão da
entender
máquina
direito.
foi aquilo que eu
But
me referi, né? A maior inserção de papel
the
devido
biggest
ao ano
inclusion of
passado que a Klabin
virgin fiber in
declara
the system,
que a
despite the
maior
fact
parte
that
desse
clubbing
papel é para
declared that
exportação
most of this
e
paper
permitiu
is for export
volume no mercado
with
interno,
no
mas
impacts in the
provavelmente vai
internal
haver alguma
market,
substituição de
there
papel nesse
might
começo do ano
be
por papel
some
que
kind
seja
of a
essa nova
paper
máquina
substitution
e isso
from the
pode
papers of this new
estressar o
machine
mercado da palha,
that
mas
could
você tem uma participação
de-stress
maior
the scrap market
desses
because you
papéis
have a
nas
greater
embalas
share of this paper
nacionais.
in
E
the
nós não
national
sabemos
scrap.
como
And
base
we
de
don't know what the
eucalipto, né?
basis
Qual o impacto que isso
of
teria
eucalyptus
na
is and
reciclagem.
what the impact this
É
would
um papel efetivamente,
have
mas provavelmente
in
com
recycling. It is a
uma
virgin fiber
reciclagem
paper,
num
but
ciclo menor
there's recycling
que
at
só para
maybe a
exportação mesmo.
smaller cycle than
Essa foi a
pine
primeira
because the
parte que
fibers are
faltou,
smaller.
que é sobre a
So
manutenção
just
dos
missing that
tratores
first
leves
part
até
about
10% do
the
lucro líquido
participation considering
previsto aprovado pelo
10% of the
conselho.
net income and the limit
Essa
approved
última
by
linha
the
de
board.
embalagem, qual é
For
o valor
this year
autorizado?
specifically, what would be the authorized
A
limit?
remuneração total dos administradores é
The
aprovada
total
pela Assembleia.
compensation of the administrators approved by the General
E esse
Assembly year
limite
over
foi
year, and this
fixado por
limit was
votações em
established at
congressos do
14
país.
million
Né?
Ele foi 17
for this
milhões
year.
e não deve ser atingido por
17 million, but
Vai
will
ser
probably
atingido
not reach
depois
the
da negociação,
17 million.
vai ser atingido próximo de 14 milhões.
Will reach close to
Aí
14
está
million.
envolvendo remuneração de
And that
conselho,
includes
remuneração de
the
todos os
board member
diretores
compensation,
e
compensation for all the
todos os
directors,
tipos de
and the
remunerações.
total limit, any kind of compensation we have.
Essa era a última pergunta.
All right, that was the
Tem mais
last
alguém que
question.
gostaria de
I don't know if there's anyone else that would like
Estamos
to
exatamente no horário,
provide
né?
questions.
Então,
We
eu acho
ended
que vale
right
a
on
pena esse
time.
último
So I
minutinho. O
think
Henrique falar um
maybe taking
pouquinho da
advantage of the
dinâmica do
last minute,
mercado,
it would
como é
be
que está
interesting for Henrique
a
to
tua
talk about the
avaliação
market
aí.
dynamic
Acho que é bacana.
and in the market, that would be good.
Acho que já foi bem comentado pelo Sérgio aí,
I
dinâmica de
think
mercado.
Sergio already talked
Ela
about the market
continua firme,
dynamic a lot. The market
a
is
demanda
still
continua
very
forte,
firm. The
o
demand is still
os mercados de
strong.
embalagem flexível, tanto no mercado interno
And
quanto no
the
mercado
flexible
externo.
package market as well.
E o mercado de resinas
And
também, a
the
demanda
resin
do mercado
market also
externo
has
continua
demand from the external
demandado,
market that
forte.
continues to be very strong.
Não estou vendo nenhuma
And I
queda
haven't
nem
noticed a drop
resposta
in
de queda.
volumes in a short period of time.
Lindo.
Lindomar? Yes, I think it was already mentioned a lot by Sergio, but the dynamic was very similar to the paper sector with Henrique. So a bit of pressure was a issue, but and the expectation is also very strong for the next month, working with the capacity, uh, the full capacity for packaging production, and so everything's pretty much calculated. So very good. We want to thank you all for your presence, and we finished right on time, and we will go back to our earnings call for the fourth quarter and the beginning of next year. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for your presence. Have a great day. Goodbye. Thank you. Bye bye.
Tchau.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye.